So, I want to start tonight with a story that came out of Arizona back in 2015. And I want you to understand something about the guy who lived this before we get into it. He was not the type to spook easy. Solo hiker, 8 to 10 hour trips alone through the backcountry. Not for thrills, just to clear his head, get away from the noise. He'd done it dozens of times, knew how to handle himself out there. And this trail, he found it almost by accident. Hidden trailhead behind a thick line of bushes, no parking nearby. Faint, barely there path that told him immediately, nobody comes out here much. Which was exactly what he wanted. The further he went, the drier everything got. Trees that used to be trees, just dead husks now. Branches collapsed across the path, overgrowth pressing in from both sides. The kind of trail that hasn't seen maintenance in years, maybe longer. But the path was still there, still distinct enough to follow, so he kept going. That's when he heard it. A whistle coming from up the mountain. Not wind through branches, not a bird. A whistle, holding a few notes in a row, melodic, deliberate, like someone communicating. He'll be the first to tell you it creeped him out, made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't fully justify. But he told himself the only thing that made sense in the moment, someone else is on the trail. Hiker maybe, no big deal. So he kept moving. 20 minutes passed, the path pushed through layers of thick, overgrown brush. He kept his eyes on the ground, watching his footing, and that's when it came again. The same whistle, same melody, but closer now and louder. He gripped his pocket knife, kept walking, told himself, still just some guy on the trail, probably. A quarter mile further up, a fallen tree right across the path, thorny branches everywhere, making it impossible to just climb over. He had to go around, stepped off the trail to the right, took a couple steps, and stopped. Down below him, a small valley, dry riverbed most likely, and right in the middle of it, a den, built from large sticks, not thrown together, constructed, complex enough that whoever made it knew exactly what they were doing. He stood there, putting it together, the whistling, the den, out here on a trail nobody uses, miles from any road. Someone was living out here. That bad feeling he'd been pushing down finally won. He turned to leave, decided he was done with this trail today. He'd come back another time, maybe with someone else. He turned around to head back down the mountain. And the whistle came from directly behind him. He spun around, facing the den, and standing just behind the valley where nobody had been a second ago was a goat. Now, a goat in the Arizona backcountry isn't impossible. They exist out there. But something about this one stopped him cold. It was large, noticeably larger than any he'd seen before, and it wasn't moving, wasn't grazing, wasn't startled by his presence. It was just standing there, eyes locked on him, completely still, like it had been waiting for him to turn around. He said, in that moment, his brain just couldn't process what it was looking at. Fear and confusion fighting each other. Part of him trying to laugh it off. It's just a goat, man. Part of him knowing something was deeply wrong with this picture. After a few seconds, he managed to pull himself together, started backing away slowly, keeping his eyes on it. One step back. Then, the goat opened its mouth. Not the way an animal opens its mouth. The jaw dropped slowly, unnaturally wide, and from somewhere inside that animal came the exact same whistle he'd been hearing all morning. He ran, full sprint down that mountain. No strategy, no thought, just pure animal fear taking over his legs. He fell multiple times, over rocks, over branches, scraped up and bleeding, and he did not stop, not once. And as he finally broke through the trailhead back into the open desert, one last whistle echoed softly down the mountain behind him. He never told anyone for years, because what do you say? How do you explain a goat that whistles like a person, that stands perfectly still and stares with intention, that appears from nowhere directly behind you on a trail you thought was empty? He figured people would think he'd lost his mind out there in the Arizona heat, and honestly, part of him wondered the same thing. That was until he started reading about skinwalkers. Now, for those of you who don't know, skinwalkers come from Navajo tradition. They are beings once human who gained the ability to transform into animals or take on their form. They are not misunderstood creatures. They are not shy. According to those who know this tradition best, if a skinwalker is showing itself to you, it's because it wants to. Think about that in the context of what he experienced. The whistle drawing him deeper into the trail, the den already there, the creature appearing directly behind him the moment he tried to leave. It wasn't startled by him. It wasn't fleeing. It was waiting for him to notice it. He said when he first read about skinwalkers and their behavior, the hair on his arms stood straight up because every single detail matched. The isolation of the location, the mimicked sounds, the unnatural stillness, the eyes that felt like they were looking through him rather than at him. He still has no definitive answer. He's not claiming to know what it was with certainty. But here's what he told me that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. He said the thing that bothered him most wasn't the whistle, wasn't even the den. It was the feeling when that goat's eyes locked onto his. That deep, bone-level certainty that whatever was looking at him understood exactly what it was doing, and had been doing it long before he ever set foot on that trail. All right, Story 1 took us into the Arizona backcountry alone. Story 2 goes somewhere different. A Wisconsin forest, a summer camping trip, and a kid who had no idea what he was actually looking at. Every summer, without fail, a group of families would pile into RVs and head to the same campsite in the Wisconsin woods. And every single year, without fail, his dad and his dad's best friend Ron would organize what they called a snipe hunt. Now, if you've heard of snipe hunts, you already know the joke. Snipes aren't real. The whole thing was just an elaborate annual prank, Ron and his dad coming up with new creative ways to absolutely terrify a group of kids who believed every single word they said. They described snipes as aggressive, bird-like creatures that hid in trees and only came out after dark.
Every year, the kids ate it up completely. Jake, 8 years old at this point, and his sister were buzzing with excitement all day. Tonight was the night they were finally going to see a snipe. Right at sunset, his dad rounded up all the kids. A few of them were already holding sticks for protection. One kid had brought an actual wooden sword. His dad told them Ron had gone ahead to scout the area. They headed into the trees, single file, like a tiny, terrified army.
10 minutes into the woods, rustling in the trees above them. Every head snapped up. Ron came flying out of the branches, covered in red, screaming that a snipe had gotten him. Every single kid exploded, screaming, running, absolute pandemonium through the dark Wisconsin forest. Jake, 8 years old, fully believing every word, sprinted with the rest of them. No direction, no plan, just pure terror-fueled running. He ran until he couldn't hear the other kids anymore. Then he stopped, breathing hard, and realized he had no idea where he was. The trees were dense around him. It was properly dark now. He found a large tree with a thick bush growing at its base, crawled in, and pressed himself as far back as he could. He tried not to cry, tried not to make any sound, sat there in that bush, listening to his own heartbeat while the forest went quiet around him. A few minutes of nothing. He peeked out and saw something moving through the trees about 30 feet away.
It looked like a dog at first glance, but the legs were wrong. Abnormally long and thin, like whatever was holding that body up had too much leg and not enough everything else. The head was misshapen, mangled looking, patches of hair scattered across its body in irregular clumps rather than a coat. It moved slowly, deliberately, and it was making a sound. Faint moaning, low and continuous. Jake said something strange happened to him in that moment. He couldn't look away. He didn't want to look, every instinct telling him to close his eyes and stay hidden, but he couldn't stop staring at it. And the longer he stared, the heavier the air around him felt. This overwhelming dread that he didn't have words for at 8 years old. He described it years later as a feeling that something was deeply and fundamentally wrong with the world. He just sat there, frozen, staring. The creature moved slowly through the trees, stopped, and then, as if it knew something was watching it, it turned its head and looked directly at Jake. Their eyes locked. Jake couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then his dad's voice calling his name, crunching leaves and twigs getting louder, his dad's hand closing around his arm, pulling him up, scolding him about running so far. Jake turned immediately to look back at where it had been. It was gone. No sound of it leaving, no crashing through brush, just gone. On the walk back to camp, Jake told his dad everything he'd seen. His dad, still in prank mode, told him it wasn't a snipe because snipes weren't real. That was the year Jake learned the whole thing had been a joke. Every year. But here's the thing. Every kid who learned the snipe hunt was fake went home disappointed. Jake went home with something else entirely,
because his dad dismissing it as a snipe didn't explain what he'd actually seen. The proportions, the patches of hair, the moaning, the way it had looked at him with what felt like recognition. He told himself for years it was a coyote, a big, weird coyote, something the darkness and his fear had distorted into something worse than it was. But something in his gut never accepted that explanation. And here's the detail that bothers him most even now as an adult. Animals run when they hear people coming. His dad was crashing through those woods calling his name, loud and clumsy the way parents are when they're scared. That should have sent any coyote bolting in the opposite direction. It didn't run. It stood there and looked at Jake first, like it wanted him to see it one more time before it left.
He didn't learn about Skinwalkers until he was an adult. And when he did, that childhood memory hit him with a completely different weight. Because Skinwalkers are not described as mindless animals. They are described as intentional, intelligent, capable of making a choice about whether to be seen or not. And what he saw that night in Wisconsin chose to let an 8-year-old boy hiding in a bush see it clearly. He still says it could have been anything. He was young. It was dark. Fear does things to perception. He holds on to that possibility. But, he said, even now, years later, when he's out on a bike ride or hiking in the woods, sometimes out of the corner of his eye, he sees it again. Same proportions, same wrong shape, same slow, deliberate movement through the trees. Just watching him. The way it watched him when he was 8 years old, in a bush in the Wisconsin dark, thinking he was hidden. 2 stories, 2 encounters, both brief, both leaving behind something that never fully went away. This last one is different. This one built slowly, over weeks, and the man who lived it carried it completely alone for 15 years before he could bring himself to write it down. His name was David, and for almost a decade, he and his wife and 2 kids lived exactly the kind of life most people only dream about. A cabin deep in the Canadian forest, no roads leading to it, nearest neighbors a few miles away through the trees, a small farm, livestock, a life built entirely by hand in one of the most peaceful places you can imagine. For years it was exactly that, peaceful, quiet, good. The kind of life where you forget the rest of the world even exists. Paths worn between neighboring cabins from years of trading food and sharing dinners. Kids growing up with the forest as their backyard. David reading late by the fire while the cattle settled in the field outside. He said it was the best years of his life. And then, very suddenly, it wasn't. It started one night while David was up late reading. The cattle outside began moving fast, which was unusual enough at that hour to make him put his book down. He went to the window, pulled back the curtain. The cattle were on the far left side of the field, moving quickly, like they were getting as far from something as the fence would allow. David shifted his gaze to the right side of the field. It was dark. His eyes adjusted slowly, and eventually he made out a shape, partially behind a tree at the far edge of the field. A deer, large, standing completely still, not grazing, not startled, just facing the house. He watched it for a moment, tried to figure out why the cattle would run from a deer, couldn't come up with a reason that made sense, told himself the cattle were just skittish that night, closed the curtain, went back to his book. A few weeks went by without incident, normal life, normal routine, and then his wife woke him up in the middle of the night. She put her finger to her lips, told him to listen. In the quiet of the cabin he heard it, something moving around the outside of the building, slow, steady, like something dragging a stick along every wall, all the way around the cabin, one full circle. And then silence. David got up immediately, checked the kids, both fine, sleeping. He grabbed his hunting rifle and went to every window in the cabin, one by one. Nothing at any of them, until the last one. His bedroom window. The same deer, standing at the edge of the dark forest, staring at the cabin, not moving at all, eyes reflecting faintly in the darkness. David had lived in that forest for nearly a decade. He knew wildlife, knew how animals behaved, and no animal, not once in 10 years, had ever behaved like this. The stillness of it, the consistency, the way it always seemed to be oriented toward the house. He had no framework for what he was looking at. A dark feeling settled over him that night that he couldn't shake. He closed the curtain, lay back down, but didn't sleep. Next morning he made a decision, told his wife to keep the kids inside and lock everything, then headed down the path toward a neighbor's cabin a few miles through the trees to ask if anyone else had noticed anything strange. The first mile he spent trying to rationalize, constructing explanations, but the more he thought about it, the more the explanations fell apart, and halfway there, he heard leaves behind him, turned around. The deer was standing on the path, 15 feet away, completely still, staring directly at him. He had seen hundreds of deer in his life, in that forest alone, countless times. He knew what deer eyes looked like. These were different. White around the iris, small pupils, human eyes. David said that that was the moment something inside him just broke. Not metaphorically, genuinely, like a part of his brain that had been holding together all his rational explanations simply gave up. Because you can tell yourself a deer is just a deer. You can explain away cattle running. You can justify sounds in the night. You cannot explain looking into an animal's face and seeing a human being looking back at you. He turned and ran the rest of the way to the neighbor's cabin, arrived barely holding himself together. The neighbor, a man who had lived in those woods far longer than David, took one look at him and didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He sat David down, made coffee, and started talking. The neighbor wasn't surprised. That was the first thing that unnerved David. The complete lack of shock on his face. He'd heard of these things before, he said. Out here, if you live long enough, you hear things. He told David about skinwalkers.
not as legend, not as campfire story, as something real that operated according to its own logic in places like this, deep forest, isolated, far from anyone who might interfere. He said skinwalkers show themselves for one of two reasons. Either you've disturbed something or they want something from you. And talking about them, he said this plainly and calmly actually brings a kind of peace, because acknowledgement is different from fear. Which somehow made David feel worse, because a man who had clearly made his peace with the existence of these things was sitting across from him, telling him this completely matter-of-factly, like a neighbor telling you about a difficult stretch of road. David left soon after. Nothing followed him home, and over the next few weeks, the deer didn't appear again. The sounds stopped. The cattle settled. Slowly, the paranoia faded. But the life he'd loved, that genuine peace he'd built out in those Canadian woods, never fully came back.
Eventually, David and his family moved closer to town. He told them it was for the kids, better schools, better opportunities. That was true, but it wasn't the whole reason. And here's the part that stayed with me after he shared this. For 15 years, he never told his wife or his kids what he actually saw on that path, or what the neighbor told him. He kept it completely to himself. Said something inside him just urged him to keep them out of it, to protect them from knowing. And I think about all three of the people who shared their stories tonight. The hiker in Arizona, the kid in Wisconsin, the father in Canada. None of them went out looking for this. None of them were chasing folklore or hunting for something to believe in. They were just living their lives, hiking, camping, reading by the fire, when something stepped into their world that had no business being there. And in every single case, the thing that stayed with them longest wasn't the fear. It was the feeling that whatever they encountered already knew they were there. Now, I'm not here to tell you what skinwalkers are or aren't. I'm not here to tell you what these people saw or didn't see. That's not my place, and frankly, it's not the point. The point is that three separate people in three completely different parts of North America had experiences that nothing in their existing understanding of the world could explain. And whatever was out there, in the Arizona desert, in the Wisconsin woods, on that Canadian forest path at midday, was looking back.